Hi, everyone. This is Doug Kreitzberg, CEO of SeedPod Cyber, and this is another edition of Click Happens. And I'm really pleased to have with me Liz Lederer today. Liz works for SeedPod Cyber. She has been on the business for many years. Let kind of Liz introduce herself and her history with the MSP community. And She's also, from what I understand, the high queen of everything that's known and should be known. Liz, really excited to have you with us. As we talk about kind of the MSPs, where they've been, kind of the history there, and where they're going. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you for the kind introduction. And I love the name of the podcast, Click Happens, because click happens in a split second. And
Yep.
when you go back and you think about the history of the MSPs, where they were, where they are, it really, it's within a blink of an eye,
Yeah.
of the changes that have happened in this industry.
Right, right, and you've been a large part of it through its history. Can you give us a kind of a brief overview of your involvement with the MSP channel?
So, it's funny. I started out years ago when it was resellers, right? And resellers would sell block time, block hours, and they would start with that. How many hours a week do you need us? And then I was working for a large company, and they were trying to break into that kind of market, and they would call it facility management.
Huh.
But the funny part about facility management, if the way our industry has acronyms, uh,
Right.
we would call them FMs. And that was not really a good name during
No,
that time, you
no.
know. And it slowly then began to morph into, you would get three guys, that worked at these resellers or that were technology guys, three guys that would get together and say, we could do that better, faster, cheaper. And the MSP community began to form. And I was way back with some of the original founders of Kaseya, which really, I think, with their tools have created that market. And
Wow.
to see how they have grown over all these years. And in the beginning, again, too, in the beginning, it was really about, is the network up and on? It was
Right,
really about IT management and
right,
just making sure that those companies were up and running. And then the next thing that came along that helped, I think, with the MSP market is the adoption of applications, right? And then
right,
the cloud. I'll never go to a cloud. I'll be cloud hybrid. I'll be cloud. And I think the days of IT management and do I or don't I go to the cloud are well past us because
right.
they're all now common practices. And
Absolutely.
and I think that's what brought MSPs into this. Those services are now more commodities.
Right, right. That's interesting. So it kind of went from block time, how much time do you need us, to kind of making sure that the systems were up and running, and then not only handling on-prem services, but beginning to handle cloud and everything that's involved with that there. And how did the MSPs, kind of keep up with the changes in your experience? I'm sure there were some that didn't, weren't able to keep up, but those that did, how do you think that, what defined them?
Well, I think too, you have to think about at that time with, say, EDS and a couple of others, IBM Global Services, the outsourcing model, right? So the outsourcing model, and that was all of the larger companies that could afford outsourcing. And, they would acquire their employees and then change their badges, but their jobs would remain the same. I think that with the MSP, I think it was the change in technology that allowed them to do that, mostly as far as remote services. That was the biggest thing that really started it. And for the longest time, that was enough. And for the longest time, you would have, back when I started working with MSPs, I think we had 10,000 MSPs. We probably have 80,000. And I
Wow.
think what MSPs did was they decided to focus on that mid-tier or that small to mid-sized business that was really underserved by some of the larger corporations that were there. And
Right.
to their credit, that with some of the tools that were available and with the knowledge that they had, they and the community that they built together, they really piecemealed this together to make it something big and special, that's just not going to go away, in my opinion.
Right, right. No, I certainly wouldn't disagree with that. And yet it's always changing, right? So now we're at a point, it's not enough for the network to be up. It and whether it's up in the cloud or on prem, it has to be safe as well. And cybersecurity over the past few years has become more and more important. And you know, when you look back over just the past couple years, how do you think that has gone for the MSPs?
So, in my opinion, I think it's almost the same way. So, you have to, in order to differentiate yourself, you have to lean into security. You have to
Right,
understand what's needed in today's, cyber attacks are more and more. Cyber attacks are no longer for the large global companies. You know,
right,
they're finding out municipalities, small office, medium, are easier targets, so they could do more in a day than they could, trying to break into a larger. So leaning into that security. And I think then MSPs, in my opinion, had to make a decision. Do they build? Do they buy? Do they outsource? So some MSPs will outsource, like SIM or, some of those. And as always, the channel was built on relationships. And so, how did they add those services in the beginning without adding that overhead and, everything else? And I think now it's become more of a need to have than, a nice to have. And I think the challenge that the MSPs have now is how do they have that conversation with their clients
right,
and especially with their prospects to, one, differentiate themselves, two, help them understand the changes and the danger of not having that protection. And so when I talk to MSPs today, I always say, if you want to change the outcome, change the conversation.
right,
So the
right,
conversations really got to be more now than ever, I think, around their business. And, if they start these conversations with their clients about, like, why now? Why are you talking to us now? The second, what's changed? And
right,
then the third is, what do you think is going to change? If you ask clients, conversations around what's happening with your business, what are the growth strategies that you're going to put in place? And then with that, how do you help them protect it, project it, and then be able to deliver it? And I
right.
think where we're at now.
Yeah, yeah. That's across the board, certainly. There, with whether it's cybersecurity or the other services that the MSP is offering, you really need to put it in the language in which the businesses understand. With what, how does it, how do the services really help the strategy? And with regards to security, that can be it's tough for maybe some MSPs to figure out how to really translate it, especially getting over the hump of what I hear a lot of clients saying, which is, well, I thought you were keeping me secure already. And how do you kind of coach MSPs to kind of begin getting over that hump to have that conversation?
Yeah, sometimes, they could be a victim of their own success.
Right.
So if there's no incident or breach, a client thinks they're already protected. Their MSP is already doing
Yeah.
what they should be doing, which is good. But,
Right.
good isn't better or best.
Right.
And usually MSPs sell in that model. He is good, he is better, he is best. And you're hoping that you'll be able to get your foot in the door in one of them and then grow it. And that's, all right, now we acquired a client. How do we get them to understand that additional services are needed, that, this isn't just going to make it anymore in this day and age. And then with prospects, it's really about talking about that full suite, protection both inside and outside. So, click happens.
Right.
Something is going to happen. And it's going to be how are you going to get protected by that? How are you going to stop that from going and creating more damage? And then how are you going to help them be protected when something does happen?
Right.
So,
Right. And do you find that you know MSPs often kind of fall victim as well to their own knowledge? They love to start talking about the technology behind the security and all the things that they're going to bring in, and the business might often be just hearing that Charlie Brown teacher wah, 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 going on while they have that conversation. Do you see that happening quite often?
I do see that happening, and I think that's where they kind of fall. Like, how did they really become the business advisor, not the IT advisor? And
Right.
even inside of corporations, they have that. What's the love language of a CIO as opposed to a compliance officer? How do you get all of that to mesh together? And really, I believe the job of the MSP is to present some of these scenarios and be able to give real world examples, and not just like, oh, we're always going to be there for you, or we're going to make sure you have that. It's because all businesses are about growth, all businesses, so it's really about understanding or helping them to open up about what's their business goal, strategy, what's going on. And I found from working with MSPs, if you ask them, tell me about your business, they do. They'll tell you. So the same thing goes for clients or prospects. Just if you start a conversation and say, tell me about your business, and then tell
Right.
me, you'd be surprised what you hear. So it's just, to me, a simple question like that, because somebody says, Liz, tell me about yourself, I'd be happy to, you know
Right.
and so I think it's the same thing about businesses, and it's really about the business, because almost every I think I've heard you say before, Doug, if you know one MSP, you know one MSP. So really what the differentiator is I think the business value that they bring, and the real life experiences. And and again, we're here, we're talking about the MSPs and how do we help them, but it's also about what are some of the added value that you could bring to them. I think right now they spend a lot of time about thinking about tools, implementation, and execution, and with that then comes integration, to automate a lot of these mundane tasks to be able to do that. But then, how do you layer that protection? And what does layered protection mean? You know,
Right.
and so
Right.
I think those are the kinds of conversations that we can help MSPs with, and then I believe that some of the objections that they hear from their clients about, no, everything's working fine, why change it? No, I think we're good. How do you help them with that objection handling?
Sure. Sure. And very, yeah, because it's not just having the first conversation or the first, it's really how do you respond to what they come back with here, uh, which is important. And over the past few years, certainly, so I would say since COVID in particular, cyber insurance itself has gone through a lot of changes, and it used to be, if you had a firewall and could write a check, you could be insured. not necessarily in that order. And now it's a lot different. You need a lot more controls in place, and sometimes there are unfortunate situations where insureds who have a claim, end up having a claim denied because those controls really weren't in place here. How do you think cyber insurance is impacting the MSP, and their delivery of cybersecurity, and is it helping them or hurting them in the process?
I think it's helping them, and I think that once if they say to their client or prospect, let's review your current policy, if they have a policy, right? And if they have a policy, a lot of times when it comes up for renewal, that's when you have to look at the controls and see if it matches and everything. And so that's where you can have that conversation about what's the gaps and how do we help you with that. If you're speaking to clients that don't have insurance and need it, a lot of the same things applies. And then you could kind of summarize that when you're speaking to prospects. And I kind of liken it back in the early days when I started, and I was working for a storage company, right? And we sold, backup, restore, remote capabilities. And I would walk into a client site and say, do you have a DR plan? And they're like, oh, yeah, we have it somewhere, And I go, okay, when was the last time you tested it? And then they got it to be a little bit more uneasy about the conversation. But that uneasiness kind of brings out, like, what's the gap? How do I help you, with that? So if you have that kind of conversation with your clients and say, okay, let's take a look at your cyber insurance policy. Let's see and make sure that you have all of the controls in place that are needed, because if there is an incident or a breach, are you going to be covered for that, or are you lacking something? And then let's start to talk about that. And I think that becomes a very important tool. And it's not about feeds and speeds anymore. It's really about it's really about the controls and the gaps. And to me, that tells more. And then after you have that conversation, you understand where the gaps are. And before you just throw a quote at them, I think then you say, what do you think is going to change in the next year? What are your revenue targets for, years next year, even 5 years out? Because nobody does a growth strategy for 1 year, I don't think.
Right.
So how do we help you map to that, or build towards that, to make sure not only you are protected on internally, but what happens externally?
Right. Those are great points, and I think it's also the important for the insurance to be in place, and the right insurance to be in place, because often the clients may have a policy that doesn't have enough limits, so they think they're protected, but they aren't. Let alone having the right controls in place. That it's which is a risk to the client, but it's also a risk to the MSP, because obviously if the client has an incident, that could, and they don't have adequate insurance, they may want to point fingers at the MSP, right? And how often do you hear MSPs being concerned about their clients and what they have in terms of security or what they have in terms of insurance? Is that something that you're hearing from the MSP community?
Yeah, we're actually hearing it more and more. And as MSPs are moving into that security space, some MSPs won't take clients or talk to
Yeah.
prospects if they're not interested in having that full security stack, because one, MSPs are protecting their business as well,
Right.
as well as theirs. And then the other thing is it's just the conversation just seems to change for them, and it no longer becomes about objection handling. It really becomes educational, you
Right.
know And I think also, and I've heard you say too, how important it is to have a cybersecurity underwriter in your back pocket. So
Right.
we can educate the MSPs, we can give them those 5 frequently asked questions, but
Right.
when it comes down to that 6th question, they want to get somebody like CPOD on the phone to guide them through that process. And
Right.
because, and in the beginning, and cybersecurity was new to everybody. Cybersecurity was new. Cybersecurity insurance was new, and from some of the companies I worked with, insurance companies took a beating in the beginning, and they're not going to do that anymore. They definitely educated themselves on how do they reduce their liability.
Yeah. That's a
and
good point.
and and so what they're doing is being very particular about the policies, about what's covered. It's really written out. If you don't have somebody who can help you with that and understand that, and even and especially help your clients understand that, that could be a big fail on everybody's part. So
Right.
having a relationship, a lot of MSPs will say, "Oh, I got a guy, or this guy's, in my community, or we do, like, oh yeah, he mentioned that." There's a lot of different layers to insurance. So it's always good, when I speak to MSPs, I'll say, what's the worst that could happen is that you build a relationship with somebody who has that expertise. So when needed, you already have that rather than scramble. Because,
Right.
disaster hits, everybody's looking for their go bag, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
but now, if they have you in their atmosphere, within their contacts, then it's a disaster could be averted by being one phone call away.
Right.
So MSPs are looking towards that because, again, if they're not covered under the controls on their policy, who does, and they find out what needs to happen in order to fix, whatever was broken, what's going on. If they're not covered by insurance, who pays for those repairs? And if they
Right.
can't pay for those repairs, they could be out of business. The MSP could lose a client. So, but I feel like it's almost a double jeopardy for the clients, because if they don't have the insurance that will cover what needs to happen, or if they don't have insurance at all, either way, they can go out of business.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is it
Yeah.
better, is it better to just protect yourself? And then not only that, there's also those other things when it comes to brand reputation, when it comes to, letting clients know, like a PR stuff. So there's a lot of layers to this. Having
Right.
somebody in the business supporting the MSPs to support their clients and teach them how to have those conversations, I think is now uh, what's needed now. And MSPs do appreciate it when you have that kind of conversation. So when I
Right.
speak to MSPs and I ask them about their business, and I ask them, how many times do your clients ask you, oh, I just, my renewal is up on my cyber insurance, and, they're going to double my rates and I don't understand why. And, for that MSP to be able to turn around and put them on the phone with us, that kind of takes all of that heat out of it and goes more into, let's help them understand what's needed.
Yeah. That that's great. And we often are brought in as quote unquote the heavy sometimes to have conversations of why they should, put MFA in place or put an EDR solution in or make sure their backup, has an has an offsite capability and different credentials and is encrypted. And unfortunately, there are, I was just reading today of a British company, 168-year-old company, had a ransomware attack and went belly up just like that. And they had insurance, they didn't have enough insurance
Yeah.
in place there to deal with it. That's where the MSPs really can serve a vital role, because they are that last mile into the digital infrastructure of small businesses, small medium-sized businesses.
Exactly. And another way to say about differentiating, when they work with CPOD and we certify their network, their infrastructure,
Right.
that's just another selling point, that they could say that we've been certified by a cybersecurity underwriter, that you're coming to somebody that has a secure, qualified, infrastructure. That
Right.
alone is a differentiator. And
Right.
they can say that right up front.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And as you think through the history and kind of where things are now with the MSP, and you've got cybersecurity, cyber threats, you've got AI, and which has a lot of promise and a lot of complexity and a lot of unknowns to it. Are these exciting times for MSPs? Are these dangerous times? Are these go run for the hills? How are you viewing this when you talk to MSPs now?
So, it's funny because, as I said, doing this for a long, long time, and, starting with the company that had the first remote tape backup, to now, as I said, with all of these things that are going out, me personally, I always find it exciting. But it's a transfer. I think we're in a transformational space for MSPs. And I think, again, if they don't build it, buy it, or integrate with it, to stay on top of what's happening in cybersecurity, then their hope is to get acquired, to have something happen. So I think it's both exciting and scary at the same time. I think, and AI adds another layer. I think AI is fun, but I think AI is still at the wild, wild west.
Sure.
If you ask anybody about LLMs, they have no idea. And, I could date myself and I could say, LLMs or, LPARs on mainframe. I feel like we're going back to the mainframe days where everything was, so I think it's exciting. And I think, given the right opportunity, the right conversation, the right partnerships, this is the right time for MSPs to really build their business, their reputation, differentiate themselves, and really help their clients, not only with keeping the network up and running, but keeping it secure, keeping them secure. And MSPs have really taken on that educational role and subject matter expert, advisory, whatever you want, but that's what clients need. They focus on their core business. MSPs focus on helping them grow and secure their core business.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And if the MSPs are having a lot of questions about these times, just imagine how businesses are, the types of questions they have, and concerns and fears. And so it's a great opportunity for MSPs to play that education role, as you said. Great opportunity for them to help shape the business strategy for their clients and for business in general. So, well, Liz, thanks so much. Really appreciate your time and your input. And you've been a great help to MSPs for a number of years, and certainly now at these interesting times, as they say, that we find ourselves. So really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on and sharing.
Thank you so much, Doug. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.